Hello and welcome to Pardon My Disruption. I am Alan Berkson. I am the Director of Community Outreach for Freshworks. And I'm joined as always by the Dr. Disruptive, Jonathan Yarmis. Welcome, Doctor.
Thanks, Alan. Good seeing you again. We
missed October. We skipped a month. Yeah. So if you missed last month's show, so did we. All right, we're broadcasting live from the offices of Workbench, the Enterprise DC. And I'd like to say it's a beautiful day in downtown New York, but it's a cold day in downtown New York.
But it is beautiful.
I feel like Groundhog Day. It's cold out there.
No, if we repeat that again in December, January, and February, right. That's Groundhog Day.
Well, so the trivia, this is the coldest day since last winter. There's trivia for you. I believe that's the definition of a trivial stat.
and so much for global warming. It's cold.
Right. So we're here the second Friday of every month. Our next show will be Friday, December 8th. So I hope to see you there. So we missed a lot of stuff. We've got a lot of stuff to cover. So we're going to talk fast. So I hope you can listen fast. We'll start off with a brief topic. Just because I'm the iPhone guy. You're not the iPhone guy. I haven't upgraded to 11, so I can still type the letter capital I, as opposed to some of my my colleagues and friends. But Apple's announcements have come and gone, and where are we?
Little note, long lamented, or something. No, this is one of those things. With Apple, there's bad news and good news. The bad news. Even the Apple 10, the Apple X, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, what is it called?
I don't know.
If anybody knows, can you please just jump in and let us know how to pronounce the new Apple device?
Yeah, or the X10, which was a home controller back in the 80s.
The X10,
90s.
Right,
yeah.
Yes. I think I still have some in my garage.
Oh, that company should be shot, because I believe they are the ones who first came up with the pop-up ad.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think they were the first pop-up on internet advertising, and for that alone, they deserve to die.
X10 cameras.
Yes. But anyhow, the interesting thing, if you remember, after the Apple 7 announcement, whenever, a year plus ago, we cast that as a throwaway announcement because the 8 was coming in a year, right. And that was going to have all the really good stuff. And the 8 came, and no, it didn't have all the really good stuff. And the X10 has come, and okay, fanboys, go ahead and say how wonderful it is and the groundbreaking things they've done that other vendors have done 3 years ago.
It's all catch up.
Yeah. It's not terribly exciting, but it's expensive, and there's pent up demand. With the net result being Apple gets the last laugh. The stock's up over 50% this year. Do not listen to us for stock advice for the most part.
No.
Yeah, because
that's a different program.
Yeah,
and it's not us.
And it's a different metric. And with that, Apple is now worth around $900 billion, and in a race with Amazon, really, to be the first $1 trillion. When you think about it, is just stunning. Now, we can get on their case a little bit. This American stalwart discovered that, okay, some of their offshore havens for hiding cash, shall we say, achieving favorable tax treatment for cash, have been closed. So they went and found one in the Jersey Islands, which are not off the coast of New Jersey.
No.
So they've got issues. And then again, with the latest shooting where they're trying to get information from the Vegas shooter's phone and can't get in, we're going to have another one of those situations in a very different political climate. So it'll be interesting to watch.
All right. Speaking of public companies who are maybe headed in the opposite direction. So I'm very excited to say, and I say this with all sarcasm and all, that I can now tweet with 280 characters, and because that was a problem that had been irking me for years, that I've been limited to 140 characters, and that was all that was wrong with Twitter, and that was exactly the solution to every one of their problems.
Well, let me play the devil's advocate here. It requires work and effort to fit things into 140 characters. You've got to distill things to the essence. And that is a skill set that is not broadly...
I'm waiting for the bad side. Yes, that's good. That's good, yes.
Yeah, but that's not a skill set that is broadly available.
I apologize for the length of this letter because I didn't have time to be brief.
Yes, yes. So what they're doing is they're opening it up to less intelligent conversation.
Right. But let's be clear about what this move is. This is a advertising and a data move. When people were restricted to 140 characters, how do you get around that? You create an image with more text in it. But you know what happens? Twitter doesn't have access to that text. That's not their data. So let's expand it so people are less tempted to do that, and we get more data.
And we're still dealing with the early stages. It's just rolled out globally this week. But I'm one of those people who has a screen with TweetDeck, which is a Twitter client that lets you have multiple columns open that are constantly refreshing. And I find it an interesting way to get a snapshot of what's going on. I look at the screen, and could you formally see, 8 or 10 or 12 entries per column? So I'm at a glance, I'm consuming less information. So I believe it's diminished my value.
But that already happened when they allowed the images to be included as part of the screen.
Yeah, but that I could...
Those take up as much space as a large tweet.
I agree, but not everybody was putting images in line, and when I glanced, I could glance past them. I think it's diminished my utility. Is it something that's going to kill the platform? No, I'm clearly not saying that.
Right.
But this is something that I don't believe adds any value. It's not going to make the engagements richer.
Well, look, we've talked about on this show very often where Twitter's value should be. And on the top 10 things that's wrong with Twitter,
this is unrelated to any of that.
People complaining about not being able to have more than 140 characters is not a challenge, and it's not going to impact Twitter's bottom line. In fact, if anything, it may. Well, I don't know. I can't say what the usage impact will be, but the more people are not going to start using Twitter because they can type it.
Right.
That's really, I guess, my statement. It's still a lousy user interface. It's still, as you said here very often, the onboarding experience is horrendous.
It should be a textbook in how not to do it. The time to value is a metric that a lot of people look at when evaluating software platforms and things. And Twitter's time to value is often measured in weeks, if not months. I always contrast that with Facebook, where Facebook, your time to value is minutes. You see interesting things from your friends. You see posts, pictures of the kids or grandkids, things like that. Immediate time to value.
Well, look, I use it's a stereotype to use my mother as an example, but she's an early adopter from a technology point of view, not because she's a techie, but because of the utility. So she early on had an iPhone. I've talked about here how she mails a book to my niece and nephew, and she'll read it over FaceTime with them. So she looks at that. Instagram comes out, she gets Instagram. Why? Because she wants to see what my kids are putting on there. Snapchat comes out, she gets Snapchat. And she has instant value, but she's not on Twitter.
Oh, my mother routinely asks me, should I be on Twitter? And
if you have to ask the question, then the answer is no.
Yeah, and the answer is a strong no.
Right.
In fact, I would dare say, and this is part of Twitter's problem, for the most part, if you're not on Twitter now, there's no particular reason to get on Twitter.
And that is Twitter's problem in a nutshell.
Yep. And on the one hand, the user count appears to be going up. On the other hand, they had to come clean and announce that, oops, for the last 3 years, we've been overstating, significantly overstating our user count.
And not only that, but let's talk about what constitutes a user.
Yeah. Yes.
Other platforms, LinkedIn is famous for really making you have a, I'm not saying that there's not fake accounts on LinkedIn, but it's more of an individual based, and there's authentication, and Facebook tries to do that as well, with varying degrees of success. It's its strength and its weakness.
Yes, and
the anonymity.
And it's a rampant with bullying, and that's been an issue for a lot of people. And Twitter, any social media certainly, but Twitter has been prominent because to some extent the president has brought more attention to the platform, and with net result, people on both sides of the aisle spend a lot of time yelling at each other, and these discussions are disheartening to say the least. If you want to ruin your day, go look at some of these tweet discussions. Go look at comments on Yahoo news stories or places.
What's Yahoo?
Yeah, or Yahoo, a place where user IDs go to be exposed. But look at comments. I understand why a lot of publications are electing to shut down comments, because the level of the dialogue, if your second grader behaved like that, you wouldn't tolerate it.
All right, you know what? So I'm going to actually ask you to put on your prognosticator hat. I need your analyst hat on for a second.
42.
All right, moving on. So this, and it leads into our next segment, which is I want to talk about fake news. But there's value in discourse. There's value in conversation. There's value in, as we talk about, mutual exploration of a topic, right? Mm-hmm. What's the opportunity? I mean, you're an entrepreneur. Is this a problem that can be solved? Is there at least an approach that you can look at that would help make that better?
Yes, but it requires a lot of investment in resource and or emerging technology. And by that I mean is there can be constructive dialogue. How do you shut it down when it becomes unconstructive? And I find that a small petri dish of that is my Facebook wall. So I am active on Facebook with political stuff. Too active probably for my own health.
I've gotten attacked on your Facebook wall.
Yes, and even more I've seen, my few remaining, Republican, Trump supporting friends have gotten attacked, and to their credit, they've hung around. Frank, hat tip to you, because for the most part, when things get bad, I've tried to moderate the discussion. I've tried to, instead of driving wedges between people, build bridges between people. I had a situation where a couple of people got into a yelling match at each other, and I chided both of them and forced the discussion to be constructive, and I had a mini victory when they friended each other on Facebook. But that requires, it's not a solution that scales, because when I step away and I come back, and I see my Facebook notification counter at 14,283, I know it's just people have been yelling at each other and the discussion has diverged rather than converged and hasn't become constructive. And so, yes, I've been able to do it in my own little world, but I don't see a solution that scales. I don't know what I could do from a platform perspective. I don't think AI is going to solve that one.
Right. Well, look, Google and Facebook were brought before Congress, and they have to solve this problem. That's why I'm asking.
Yeah, and I think the fake news one is both easier to solve and yet even more complicated, because what to one person looks like fake, to another person looks like truth. How do we ascertain what the facts are when they're so subject to interpretation? You know, there's an old saying that history is written by the victors. You know, so,
and there are alternative facts.
Yes, and you know, I both laugh at that term, but on the other hand, you know, we've long said there are lies, damn lies in statistics. You know, when we can make things look the way somebody wants. In fact, we've got an entire industry. One might argue that the public relations industry is all about presenting facts in such a way that it inevitably leads you to a certain conclusion, even while an evaluation of the facts, or if you incorporated a broader set of facts, you might arrive at different conclusions. So I think this is one that is much more complicated. You know, I mean, what we're focused on right now, you know, isn't fake news. It's really, we've got a political schism here in the country, and also in other global situations where there are facts that are presented that may or may not be true. There are outright lies, and there are lots of gray areas in between. And if all we do is cut out the outright lies, I don't know that we've accomplished a whole lot, because there are so many other gray interpretations. So this is, you know, to me, the problem isn't the platform. The problem isn't the participants. The problem is the consumers.
Well, when you said participants, I didn't know you were going to say consumers next. Yeah. No, look, that was in my TED Talk. The first essential skill that I talked about for the 21st century was the ability to vet, the ability to tell something, to look to determine if something is true. Recently, somebody I know posted something on Facebook, and he said, how do I tell, and a friend of mine said, how do I tell if this is true? What's your process? And I thought that was a great question. And that's the challenge, is that we have consumers who are not used to putting in the effort. That it does take some work. It's a skill you have to learn. It's hard in the beginning.
And Democrats don't sit there smugly going, yeah, that's right, because we're as guilty of that as the other side, if not more so, because we believe we've got some moral high ground.
And the stuff I see that people, you know, the fake news problem can exist because of this failure by the consumer to be a, you know, what is it, the Sims, to be an educated customer, right?
I miss Sims.
Yeah.
I got a lot of clothing there.
There you go.
But, you know, I also think, you know, as difficult as it is sometimes, watch an hour of Fox News a couple of times a week. Because to me, it's imperative to, A, have my fact base challenged. So what are the things that I'm not getting through my existing lens? And what is it that the other side is seeing? That there are things that we look and say, how can they possibly believe that? And when you look at their fact set, it's like, that's how they believe it. I watched some Fox News Wednesday. You wouldn't have known there was an election on Tuesday to watch. And yeah, you know, they covered it, but a lot more was, didn't the president give a remarkable speech in Japan? One of the best speeches in the history of international diplomacy.
Right.
And when that's your fact base, you know, it inevitably leads you to draw certain conclusions. And so I think this is imperative. You talk about your process. You know, one of the things I learned at Gartner and have talked about writing a book was, you know, had discussions at one time with Gideon Gartner about doing this, about the research process. And he wanted to write this very academic treatment. And I said, no, there's something like, you know, the Tom Peters, you know, Mike Hammer, these business bestsellers, that the research process involves 3 steps. There's input. So what is your fact base? And make sure you have the best possible fact base. Look at the things that aren't coming in, through your natural feed. And it's hard to do because, there's a human tendency. We like things that affirm our position rather than challenge our position.
I have a firm belief that I only believe in studies that I agree with.
Yeah, yes.
And if you follow me on Facebook, you know that I do that all the time.
Yes.
Coffee is going to make you live longer. Chocolate is the miracle food and all that kind of stuff. Yep.
Yep. You can find all of that stuff. So you've got to go search out evidence that challenges you. Then the next stage is process. It's not just take in all of this data, this information, but what are the conclusions we can draw from that? What are the trends or the interruptions in trends? It's not just enough to understand the data. If you're consuming something, understand the bias of the person who's presenting it to you. They're not some oracle from Delphi. They're somebody who's got an agenda. So focus the data you're getting through their agenda.
And to be clear, that agenda may or may not be direct.
Mm-hmm.
It could be something that they don't even realize that they're
right.
Everybody has bias. Bias. Yes. It's impossible to not have it. And the question is, how aware are you as the person who's doing the research or writing the content, and then how aware are you as the person who's consuming it and processing it?
Yeah, and then the last step, and I give you a lot of credit for this, on the output side, it's enough that you do this, but if you don't information in a way that changes people's behavior, it's great that you've gotten better at it, but that's not a big victory. So your campaign to have people educated is a laudable one, because that's an essential step of the research process. You're already a pretty good consumer about this, but you're trying to change people's behaviors. And so, I think when we look at this information overload world, people say, how can I keep up with all of this stuff? The answer is you've got to actively manage the process, because if you don't, there are things we call people. The information junkie is a person who just takes in more and more information and does nothing else with it other than perhaps win at Jeopardy. Then the process people are the analysis paralysis. I can spend all of there's 74 different ways I can look at this information, and let's keep digging deeper and deeper and deeper, and they engage in, I'm not going to use the term. And then, the empty talking heads are the people who, without regard to input or process, just talk a lot.
So, and this could probably be a whole show, and I don't want to, but I want to dig in this one piece is, do you start with a question? Because that could be, meaning, so you've got the input.
Yep. And I think you do. And that question is, how am I wrong? Because if you look for information about how you're right, you will always find it, even when you're the last person in the room to realize you're an idiot.
Right.
If you look for proof you're wrong and give it an honest search, only in the absence of things that cause you to say, wow, I was wrong about that one, might you be confident that you're right. So the question is, how is it that I'm wrong?
I love that. I love that. And like I said, I think we need to get into that topic some more. So we're always thrilled to be broadcasting here from Workbench. Workbench is an enterprise technology VC.
Workbench.
See Workbench.
Yeah.
And we
I was not showing you branding on the top of my head.
Thank them for giving the space. So we have a segment where we give a little bit of our enterprise technology insights. Coming up next year is a really big topic. Obviously, it's not a topic necessarily for U.S. specific, but it's a global issue. But it's a global issue which impacts everyone, and because there is no local, everything is global, right? So the GDPR, as you put down here, the next Y2K.
and
so you maybe just give a quick overview of what GDPR is.
GDPR stands for General Data Protection Regulation. It is an EU regulation about data privacy and the right of consumers to have informed consent and control where their information gets shared. In this cloud-based world, the physical location of data, you have no idea where your stuff is. And having no idea where your stuff is, you often don't have any understanding of the protections you've been given or not given. So, gee, it's great that there are U.S. regulations. This is sitting on a server in Germany, and the German courts come in and say, this information is physically resident in Germany. Here's a subpoena. We want the information.
Right. And actually, it's usually, look, my experience at working for a SaaS company, it's usually the other way around. Companies are concerned about data that is resident in the US.
In the US, yeah. But everybody's concerned about where the data is resident and who's responsible for what. And GDPR is basically a set of regulations and guidelines from the European Union about where data is located, what customers can find out about it and control it, what vendors need to enable them to do. And in the absence of adhering to these regulations, there are some fairly stiff fines, I think, maxing out at about 4% of revenue, which is a not insignificant sum of money when you're a company who's, that's a 50% of your profit margin kind of thing. So there are real penalties behind it. And most companies, these regulations go into effect in 6 months. There are a lot of companies who are willfully ignorant, thinking, okay, this is going to get changed. I don't need to do anything now. I was reading a story yesterday that said only 22% of companies surveyed have a plan in place to meet GDPR regulations. And this was an audience at a conference that would have been inclined to be aware of these regulations. So if 22% of the people who are aware, again, here's how you evaluate data. This isn't a scientifically valid survey, so that number 22%, let's evaluate what it means.
Right.
What it means, that's not like, wow, so 1 in 4 have a plan in place. It's like, no, 1 in 4 who are motivated to have a plan in place have a plan in place.
Right.
It suggests that a vast majority of the ones who aren't so inclined. So the bottom line, this is going to be a problem with fines out there, all sorts of political wrangling. Really, any vendor with a global presence, and if you're on the internet, you have a global presence, is going to be affected by this. And if you've got data, if you're on a SaaS platform, it's one thing if the data is resident on a platform you own and control, that enables you to do things in a self-contained environment.
Right.
If you're dealing with multiple cloud providers who are moving data around, one of the great things about the cloud is you've got this enormous flexibility. Well, that flexibility now comes with some responsibility. Responsibility, thy name is GDPR.
All right. The other thing I think, which one do you want to do? You want to talk about IBM or you want to talk about Uber?
Well, we can talk about IBM. 22nd consecutive quarter of declining revenues. When does a slump become a trend?
Yeah.
And then Uber, here in New York. There are now more Uber rides than taxi rides in New York City, which is, when you think about it, a pretty remarkable change in a relatively short period of time. That they've been able to achieve over 50% market share for years. This is one of those examples of if you build a better mousetrap, the world will beat a path to your cell phone app.
So is this a true example of disruption?
Yes, in a lot of ways.
Look,
yeah, but
disruption is one of those terms that people throw around, and as you like to say, it's not necessarily a good thing. In fact,
it's not a value proposition to the end users.
But how many decks? How many startup decks have the word disruption as a value proposition?
Yeah, I mean, I get away with Dr. Disruptive because I'm a consultant, and the more people who are, what's going on and need to know, let's talk to the doctor about disruption. Yeah. How many of you woke up this morning saying, my life has gotten pretty easy. I really need somebody to come up and screw with the things that I'm doing and disrupt me. No, it's not a user value proposition. But one of the things I talk about with regard to disruption where you add an incremental feature, that's not disruption. When you attack business models, that is a truly disruptive force because, among other things, it makes it very difficult for the incumbents to respond. So one of the things Uber did is, if you're not familiar with the way the New York taxi system works, New York taxis have something on it called a medallion. And New York only issues so many medallions, and scarcity
for a while that was a Trivial Pursuit question, which is they give you a number and then you have to guess what it was, and that was the number of medallions, which hadn't changed since like 1920.
Right.
And recently, in the last couple of decades, they've added some more of it.
Yeah, but that's a controversial matter because those medallions were in fact an investable item.
Six figures, yeah.
I think they were north of $1 million at some point. Your barrier to entry, if somebody wanted to implement taxi service in New York, they had to accumulate medallions and required millions of dollars in investment.
Right.
Uber came along and said, we can run a taxi service and invest $0 in that.
Right. In fact, we can have people invest in it because they're going to use their own cars and they're going to use their own capital.
Although, interesting, just yesterday, a London tribunal came down with a judgment that said Uber drivers have to be treated more like employees, including such things as paid time off. And at some level, that starts to attack Uber's disruptive business model. It says, you're disrupting it with independent contractors. Well, not exactly. And this is one of those things.
It changes their pricing, their revenue model and the efficacy of the revenue model.
Yes, I mean, which we know what their revenue model is. We're unclear what their profitability model is, and this is something the extent.
don't need to be profitable. Oh wait, right. we don't say .com anymore.
Yeah, but this is something
Just ask Amazon.
That aside from their issues having been banned from, or the ban to be implemented in London perhaps later this month, subject to negotiation. So they're being attacked on the legality of their service, where they deliver it, and now they're being attacked on the cost structure of how they deliver the service. This is something that is existentially problematic for Uber.
Again, put your analyst hat on it. Is this retribution, or is this a normalization of the market?
Or is this, as so often is the case, and this is something you say a lot, I believe, follow the money.
Right.
That there are people who got the money for all those medallions. That was the city of New York who got that money.
Right.
Uber comes along and says, nothing for New York. And I think this is New York going, and other places going, we love what you do. We understand that consumers love it. What's in it for us? So I think this is something that gets resolved by money, and having a new CEO in place who is, shall we say, less contentious.
That's not difficult.
Yeah. I was going to say virtual Attila the Hun might have been less contentious, but having a new, this is going to be their litmus test. Can they sustain the business model while appeasing those who were economically challenged by the disruption? I think this is one where Uber's gotten way ahead of its skis. And if you understand the analogy, what happens when you get ahead of your skis, often when you land, you tumble. I think this is one where they're going to do some 360s in midair. And the question is, are they eventually going to land on their skis, or are they going to face plant?
And that will probably extend to other companies who've done the Airbnbs and the of the world.
But that's why you're seeing new entrants emerge that learn from the mistake. One of my favorite things to attack is the notion of a first mover advantage. I generally say there's a first mover disadvantage. Show me first movers that have actually won in situations. Apple wasn't the first mover. Amazon wasn't the first mover. Google was about the 6th or 7th.
Microsoft was definitely not a first mover.
Right. You know, and to the extent Uber in some ways was a first mover creating the marketplace, you know, there are a lot of forces that are rallying around Lyft and other competitors, you know, that leave Uber and its you know, virulent, you know, our way or the highway approach vulnerable now that some of the people who have the ability to impact Uber's business are starting to get traction on that impact.
Right. And at the same time, the societal impact of Uber is creating more opportunity because and this is a bigger story, but do you need to buy a car?
Yeah.
Do you need to even have a driver's license?
Right.
You're a teenager. Or you say, nah, do I ever need to buy a car?
No, I read a story by Bob Lutz, and those of you not car guys may not recognize the name Bob Lutz, but he was one of the industry visionaries for many years, you know, car design guy. I think, you know, the Mustang was his baby back in the 60s, and he been instrumental. And he's talking about, you know, let's look at the future world. And I think his vision for when this future world, I think he was talking about in 10 years, it's going to be radically different. And I think he's way overly optimistic on the time frame. But go find the article he wrote, because I think it's an interesting statement of what happens when you don't own cars, when there's no real differentiate. The car is a mode of transportation, you know, and we do things to have the most efficient transportation. So you get in your pod, well, it gets in line.
It becomes a utility.
Yes. Yes.
Just like electricity or internet.
Yes, and as a car guy, it pains me to see that future, and I think he overstates a bunch of things, and the safety of this stuff. You know, it would be one thing if I believed software was perfect. You know, that's one of the things about the making of the sausage. Right. You know that Murphy was an optimist. Things will go wrong at the absolute worst possible time with the worst possible consequences. But he paints a very interesting vision of where we're going with transportation as a utility.
All right. So moving on with disruption, Uber is something that people understand. It's you're paying for you're getting a car ride, and it's coming from your buddy who's making some money on it on the side. It's, what do they call it? It's your side job. Your side job.
Or your side something. They use a different.
But let's talk about just like many people use disruption in their startup pitches. I believe lately maybe the second or third most common is blockchain and crypto something, cryptocurrency, crypto ledgers or whatever it is. I don't even know where to go with this because,
we've determined the first question you ask is what's wrong.
Right. And I think that if you asked 20 people on the street what Bitcoin is, you probably get 10 people who didn't know what it is, 5 people who knew what it was but couldn't describe it, 3 people who described it wrong, and maybe 2 people who actually understood it.
And I would say that's in New York.
In New York, right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. There are a lot of places where you get people going, what?
Right.
And one person getting it wrong.
Right.
And so, well, first of all, let's separate what blockchain is from what a cryptocurrency is. And
I think that's one of the biggest challenges, actually.
Yeah. And cryptocurrency is the easier one to explain because we're familiar with the notion of money. And before, money ultimately had a physical representation. You had dollar bills. They were either in your pocket or in a bank that would give you an accounting of your money. But ultimately, it resulted in something we could trade that resolved itself into a physical commodity that constrained the capacity and all sorts of things like that. A cryptocurrency says, the notion of physical money is outmoded. What do we need physical money for? We pay for things with non-physical, most transactions, I do very little with cash these days. So what if we started from the assumption that we wanted a currency that had all of the advantages of physical money, but eliminated some of the disadvantages, including the ability to share it, move it without odious government regulations and things like that.
What are the advantages of physical money? It's basically it's anonymity, it's control.
Yes, and sort of anonymity, but there are all sorts of ways. The cash itself. Ask a bank robber who's had a dye pack explode on him.
But for the most part, if I have $10 and I give it to you, that transaction is anonymous.
Yes. And so, so what are the value of a cryptocurrency? It's retains the anonymity, has the flexibility of purely digital representation. So you've got greater ability to share it, move it, conceivably use it. Now, let's get into how widely is it used? You said you invested in Bitcoin and one of its competitors, Ethereum. Have you bought anything with your Bitcoins? I think.
Well, an even better question is: have I been presented with an opportunity to buy something with it? And the answer is no.
Yeah.
So when I go to make a purchase, it says, do I want to use my credit card? Do I want to have it directly debited from my checking account? It even
Apple Pay, Android Pay,
right. So
Google Pay,
right?
Samsung. I mean,
but those are all still tracking back to. I haven't even been given that opportunity. So.
Well, that's because Morgan Stanley had a quote I love. They said, Bitcoin acceptance at merchants is virtually zero and shrinking. I mean, give them, talk about damning, and part of the reason is, that even the merchants are wondering what's the advantage. You've got the classic chicken and egg problem. Until a lot of merchants accept it, users and San Francisco people, you think it's broadly available, but it's in about a 15 square mile area, where we've got the chicken and egg problem, that says until the places accept it, it's
right.
No better than anything else for me, with the net result being it's perceived to be a place where money launderers and other criminal elements are better able.
It's another version of diamonds or gold or other stuff that you can store value in that's not traceable.
And because of that, governments have taken a fairly skeptical eye. Financial institutions, which have all the regulations about know your customer and so on, have been very reluctant to touch it. So it's something that promises a lot. The realization of it has been slow because of all sorts of institutional barriers.
So you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Correct.
Bitcoin is a implementation of something that actually is very exciting and disruptive.
Yes, and that's the blockchain technology. And the 7-second answer of what is blockchain, it's really a distributed ledger. Rather than having some centralized authority that exerts control over how we store and track information, that this is in fact distributed over a network of participants that agree to a set of rules, have constraints and market forces and stuff like that. But at its fundamental, it's a distributed ledger, which sounds terribly boring in a lot of ways, but it actually opens up all sorts of interesting applications precisely because of that distributed nature, because so much of what we rely on these days is trust. For a lot of situations, if I can't trust it, I will not engage with it. So how do we achieve that trust? Traditionally, that trust was achieved by having some central authority who we trusted. Well, but we're living in a world today where, being a poster child or government, where distrust.
PayPal exists because of that very thing. So eBay you want to sell something, I want to buy it. How do you get me the stuff and I get you the money?
Yeah.
In a trusted fashion.
Yep. And so, we've gone from a place where we're not trusting the central authorities to where we'll distribute trust. So do we have trust and faith in the process so that we know the process is reliable and less reliant on the central authority being reliable?
I was just at Gartner Symposium in Orlando last month.
With 8,000 of your closest friends.
And there was a stat, I wish I remembered the stat, but they were talking about this is for CIOs and CTOs, but CIOs, that blockchain, if you're not working on blockchain projects already, you're probably too late. Not too late, not too late, right.
Behind the curve.
Behind the curve. And that is a phenomenal statement in terms of the impact, what the perceived future impact is of this type of technology.
Although, first of all, let's evaluate the source. Let's go through our process of vetting, and said source in a world that's dominated by Oracle, Microsoft, IBM. What do I need to call Gartner for? Because they're just going to tell me, maintain the status quo, pick from among the large vendors. So they need to highlight market forces that create confusion so that customers feel a need to reach out and sustain their Gartner relationship.
Wait, let me write that down so when I talk to my rep next time, I can have some bargaining power.
Now that said,
but it's a bellwether. It's not.
Yes.
It's a data point.
Yeah, and all I'm trying to do is.
I wasn't saying that they're authoritative about it, but I'm just saying that at one of the most influential tech conferences in the world, perhaps the most, this was a big topic. So it's not something that is on the fringes of startups in San Francisco or New York. It's not some like trying to make this is in the heart of technology. This is a concern.
Yes, and all I was trying to do is go step back from the if you're not doing it today, you're going to die and be out of business within 3 years. P equals 0.8.
But I guess, like I said, my point was that it was an unlikely place in my mind to hear that type of rhetoric.
Yes.
And those type of numbers.
Yes, and all I'm taking exception is that it's an unlikely place because there's in fact vested self-interest for them to call it out. But it is nonetheless, a significant technology, and at some point we ought to dive deeper into it in terms of what are some of those disruptions. How's it going to manifest itself in healthcare, for instance? Because there are fascinating applications.
Anything that has to do with privacy and trust.
Yep, and information sharing, whether it's how much money I've got, what my health record.
Maybe we need to bring in an expert on the show. We can have our first guest.
Yeah.
All right. For this next segment, I can't remember the Gilda Radner character from Saturday Night Live.
Rosanna.
No, it wasn't Rosanna. No, it was the other one, where she'd say this.
Mrs. Lubner. No.
No. You have to do you've been the guy who's been always on everybody about changing your passwords and having complex passwords. And what are you about to tell us?
Well, Mr. Password, the guy who said you need to have all of these unique, impossible to remember passwords, different for every site. He said, those are now actually a bad idea or unnecessary. And the reason being, that it's all done, password breaking is all done algorithmically. So something that has pound signs and numbers and upper and lowercase letters is no more complicated for a computer to break than 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They may keep the casual hacker. I mean, if I sit down at your computer, I'm going to try and type password 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's going to stop me. Yeah, but you being Flow, progressive commercial.
Right.
But basically said, pick a password. Something that's long but easy to remember, and only change it when there's a real need to change it. We don't need to be going through all the machinations now that they're getting the passwords either by brute force computer work or they're stealing it from somewhere. And change it, yeah. When you've got evidence that it's been stolen, change it.
All right, another quick bite.
Which, oh, by the way, if you're Yahoo, if you've got a Yahoo, before we thought only 1 in 3, it was only 1 billion. Now Yahoo finally acknowledged that they were all stolen, all 3 billion of their accounts. I mean, they're only.
Yahoo account is, I'll go and change my password. Actually, I do use it. Just for fantasy football. The only reason I use it. All right. So if somebody wants to hack my fantasy football account, maybe you can do better because
you're not.
I'm not. All right. What's your bet for where will Amazon's new headquarters be?
Oh, interesting one. For those of you who don't know, they're looking for a second headquarters location, and I think the number they're talking about is targeting it to have 40 to 50,000 people, and I think 230 something locations in the U.S. and Canada applied for it. Where do I think it's going to be?
Is it going to be New York, Boston, Austin, the tech hubs? Is it going to be outside of that?
Well, part of it is it can't be too many places because they want an educated mobile workforce.
Right.
So to sustain 50,000 employees suggests it's not going to be Sioux Falls, South Dakota.
Okay. Sorry, South Dakota.
Yeah, but has nothing to do with the quality of your workforce. It has to do with the quantity,
the availability
of your workforce. Yeah. I'm going to pick a long shot. They're going to be civic-minded and go to Detroit.
Detroit. That you got the infrastructure, you got the you're centrally located, and you've got cheap real estate.
University of Michigan, so you've got great educational institutions. You've got a lot of labor force from the automotive industry. That as people start buying cars, that their long-term production volumes are going to be down. There's a skilled workforce,
and from a civic-minded point of view, you could do a lot of good there.
Yeah, so I'm picking Detroit.
All right. Let's talk about some of our recurring features. I know we love to talk about, we're talking about security and privacy, but this first one you just.
Yeah. So the Russian security firm, Kaspersky, a lot of you have their antivirus software on your computers. Really? We're going to roll.
Wait, here's a surprise. Here's a surprise for you. Wait, you probably never would have guessed this.
Yes, that a Russian security software company was sharing information through backdoors with the Russian government.
That's a head scratcher.
Yeah, sure. It's one of those ones where they've always said no, 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 and now it's like, well, yeah, I guess we were. If you've got their antivirus software and it's protecting anything you remotely care about, go get somebody else. Get Trend Micro. Get Symantec. Use the stuff built in with your operating system. Use nothing, because it will be more secure than using theirs.
Speaking of secure, considering we just passed Election Day, and there's always talk about electronic voting and stuff like that. This will make you all feel really comfortable and about our process.
Yeah, there's a big security conference called DEF CON. voting terminals to the conference and said, okay, have at them. All 30 were hacked, including some in just a matter of minutes. So anybody who says that the security of our last election, where significant numbers of people voted electronically, no, they're secure. It couldn't have been done. No, we don't have evidence of it being done, but we certainly have no faith in the fact that it couldn't have been done.
Well, look, the definition of a secure system is one that's not plugged in.
And has no users.
There's just no such thing.
Yeah.
If somebody can get in, then anybody can get in.
Yes, and the greater the incentive to get in, the greater the likelihood that somebody will get in. And, that calls into question, the question you should be asking me, does that mean we shouldn't have electronic voting systems?
Jonathan, does that mean we shouldn't have electronic voting systems?
I believe that for a lot of things that we think of as essentially secure systems, that until and unless we change our design philosophy, we ought not to use systems in that situation. And when I say change your design philosophy, oftentimes security is just an afterthought. The first thing you're doing when you're building a product, you don't go, how can I make this the most secure product possible? You go, how can I make this have a feature set that is compelling enough to get people to use my platform?
Wait a second. Could we sprinkle some blockchain on it?
That is an interesting one where the short answer is yes.
Because it's not just about security; it's about auditability.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can verify what your vote is, and it doesn't just with what if there's something as part of that ledger that doesn't match up with the rest of the distributed ledger, then there's a problem.
Yes.
And so that's how you can see if something's that. We need to do another blockchain session. A couple of quick topics. I'm just going to say, guess what happened to Snap's market value?
Yeah.
It's gone. Okay, next topic.
And their glasses gone because nobody wants to walk around wearing dorky glasses. I still maintain long-term optimism toward these kinds of things with augmented reality. It's going to be valuable, but right now as a consumer product, no.
All right, interesting factoid. Oh no, we talked actually. No, here, do this one. I like this interesting factoid.
United, and I'm a multi-million-mile flyer in United in my history. That is not a brag, believe me. If you've spent time on United,
right. No, we need to give you like a sympathy, yes.
So United, I believe it was yesterday, maybe Wednesday, had the last flight of its 747. Majestic airplane. I still remember seeing it for the first time. It's certainly something that fueled my passion for air transportation and travel. And its retirement from the United fleet, and later this year or early next year, it'll be gone from Deltas as well. I believe it's already gone from Americans.
Venerable 747.
Yep. Majestic plane. Its wingspan is wider than the Wright brothers' first flight. The Wright brothers' first flight could not go from one end of the 747 wings to the other. We've come a long way.
We have come a long way. All right, cool tech. This is really cool tech.
Yeah, I just this morning on my train into New York, there were these two German women talking to each other, and I got involved in the conversation, and they were talking about the challenge of being a dominantly German speaker who has some command of English to have people understand them and have them understand what the people are saying. Google has released a $160 headphone set, earbud solution, very reasonable, that translates in real time. So you can sit there.
Train.
Oh, it's think about that. They can talk in German, we can talk in English, and we can all converse in real time with a reasonably good experience.
Right. Simple,
real-time
simple
independent
phrases.
speaker.
Right.
I remember Ray Kurzweil giving a talk at a Gartner conference that I hosted in the late 80s, talking about real-time speaker independent voice recognition, layering on top of that now and simultaneous translation, and so on, that's actually good enough to use.
That's real, like, science fiction future tech.
Yeah.
That's real.
And $160 you can get it today.
Awesome. All right. Why don't you leave us with a quote of the month, Doctor?
Yeah, this is a particularly timely and salient observation. Somebody said, that is one of the consequences of the weak sense of responsibility of the press. The press does not feel responsibility for its judgments. It makes judgments and attaches label with the greatest of ease. Mediocre journalists simply make headlines of their conclusions, which suddenly become generally accepted. No, this is not a quote from our president. First of all, it's got too many words and big words, but
they're good words.
Yeah,
the best words. Yeah.
But it was from Alexander Solzhenitsyn, a Russian political prisoner, talking about an environment of 50 years ago, and it is as salient and relevant today. And the fact that we listen to that and apply it to our political climate, comparing it to the Russian gulag environment of 50, 60 years ago, is chilling.
Well, on that note, because we like to. This is a very we always talk about happy things. We talk about a lot of downers.
Only 160 something days till pitchers and catchers report.
No, less than 100.
Is it?
I thought.
Well, wait. We've got December, January, February. Yeah, so maybe it's around 100.
I think around 100.
And the Jets are doing.
I thought we were going to talk about good things.
They're winning their way out of the quarterback. They can't even tank well.
All right. Well, this has been Pardon My Disruption. I'm Alan Berkson and Jonathan Yarmis. We're here the second Friday of every month. I'm actually going to start to push people. Check us out on Facebook. We have a Facebook page. You can join the conversation. Let us know what you want to hear about. We probably ignore it anyway, but let us know, because
no, give us your holiday gift ideas. Other than the Google headphones, what should we talk about next month to set you up for Kwanzaa?
Right. So our next show will be on December 8th. Please join us then. Thank you, and we'll talk to you soon.